Hey there, macro folks. This is Mr. Hooker, and this is video 3 of income and expenditures. Finally getting to the income expenditures model. So, hey, only took 3 videos to get there. Um, so here we are. Now we are to the model. Got the multiplier. Here we go. Here are our assumptions of the model. Changes in overall spending lead to changes in aggregate output. Interest rate is going to be fixed. Easy button assumption. Taxes, government transfers, and government purchases are all zero. Once again, easy button assumption. Exports and imports are both zero. Once again, easy button assumption. Later on, we'll loosen those. We'll start adding that stuff in. You make you make them small numbers, and you kind of deal with that. You do things to it, but it just kind of works that way. All right. So planned aggregate spending, real GDP. Notes with no taxes and transfers, GDP equals C plus I. Disposable income is equal to GDP. You see where this is going. And so your aggregate consumption function is once again C is equal to A plus MPC times YD. And so planned investments also fixed. Planned investments always the same. So whatever it is, 25, 20, whatever, it's going to be that all the way down. So planned aggregate investment is equal to C plus planned investment, where planned aggregate investment or aggregate expenditures um, is the total amount of planned spending in the economy. Simple, right? So here we go. This is what this looks like. So if C is 300, if our consumption function is 300 plus 0.6 times YD, then what we have here with real GDP here on the far left, uh, disposable income there 0 to 3,500, consumption 300 to 2,400, planned investment is going to be 500 at that one, um, and then planned aggregate expenditure 800 to 2,900. So let's talk about how this works really quick while we're on this. All right. So AE, aggregate expenditure, that is spending. Okay, that is our expenditures. And real GDP, I need you to think about that is output. So that needs, don't think about that as spending, but think about that as output. So that's how much stuff we made. Aggregate expenditures, how much we spent. Okay. So if so basically purchases. Um, so if we look at it in that kind of way, so real GDP is output, AE is spending, um, in that kind of way. Um, so if we go down this piece where real GDP is at 0 and AE is at 800, we are spending way more than what we're producing. So we, the people, are buying more stuff than what is being produced. What that means is the firms need to produce more. So, what does that mean for employment, incomes, and all of that kind of stuff? Well, that means that the firms are going to have to hire people to produce more stuff. So, unemployment is going to fall, incomes are going to rise. That's what you need to know for that. So, all of that, and then GDP is going to rise. So, and that's basically what's going to happen there. So that's the same thing here at level 2. AE is 1100, GDP is 500. We're spending more than they're making. So basically, we're telling them, you need to make more. They're going to go hire people. They've got to pay those people. Incomes are going to rise. Unemployment's going to fall. Same at level 3. We're at 14. We're spending 1400. It's it's really 1.4 trillion, and they're producing 1 trillion. So unemployment falls, incomes rise. Level 4, we're spending 1.7 trillion, they're producing 1.5 trillion. Once again, unemployment falls, incomes rise. And then the fifth one, we're spending 2 trillion, they produce 2 trillion. Well, we're at equilibrium at that point. But let's go past that a little bit. All right? So let's go to the next one. 6. We're spending 2.3 trillion, they produce 2.5 trillion. Well, what that says is they have too much. So they go to the warehouse and we've got stacks and stacks of stuff, but people ain't buying that much stuff. Well, what that means now is we need to slow down production. So what are we going to do? We're going to lay some people off. We're going to send them home. Now, if we send them home, we're not going to pay them. That means what's going to happen is employment is going to rise, incomes are going to fall. So if we are below equilibrium on this thing, and AE is greater, AE is less, excuse me, at this point, AE is less than GDP. At that point, unemployment is going to rise, employment falls, and income will fall because basically I ain't going to pay these people. So that is the way that works. So go down one more, 2,600 is being spent, 3,000 is being produced. So we're off by 400, $400 billion. They're producing $400 billion too much. So basically, we need them to slow down even more, and that is how this looks. So basically, they're going to have to lay people off again, still, and we are looking to. So they're going to lay them off. They're not going to pay them. Unemployment goes up, incomes go down. That's how that looks. So what does this look like? There's your aggregate consumption function, where 300 is your vertical intercept, plus 0.6 times YD. If we shift it to 800, there that is. Uh, and that's how that works out. So if they move to a situation where there's no unplanned inventory investment, we have a different equilibrium. So in that case, the unplanned inventory investment becomes zero, and you're going to have real GDP from 0 to 3,500, AE from 800 to 2,900. Unplanned inventory investment goes from negative 800 to 600, and where it is zero is basically where we are at equilibrium. So that is an odd situation and not really the way the world works, but it's kind of weird to think about it in that way. So planned aggregate spending can be different from real GDP only if there's unplanned inventory investment, only if there's unplanned inventory investment in the economy. So if firms have overestimated sales and produced too much, there'll be unintended additions to inventories, and unplanned will be positive. Oh, okay, there you go. If firms have underestimated sales and produced too little, there will be unintended drops in inventories, and your unplanned investment will be negative. So this happens a bit. Nothing ever goes as planned. Business cycle interferes, and we say, hey, we go out in our first call of the year, and we're like, hey, we're going to build we're going to build 20 more stores this year. And then all of a sudden there's a downturn and we end up building 5 more stores this year, not 20. Or we say we're going to build 10 more stores and there's an upturn in the economy and we end up building 15 more stores. So there's all kind of crazy stuff that happens. And it's all basically cyclical. What happens to the business cycle? It causes these things to happen, and you just roll with it. We got a lot of money. We want to make a lot of money. Businesses have never been known to be. Um, I mean, they are loss averse. They're loss averse, but if they see the opportunity to make a lot of money and take somebody else's money in the process, they are going to do that. Don't ever underestimate that. So that is the way it goes. Suppose the level of planned aggregate expenditure in the economy is 500, real GDP is 600. What's happening in that case? So you got unplanned increases in inventories are occurring. Unplanned decreases in inventories are occurring. Inventories be unaffected, remain at the planned inventory level. Excess production will occur. Um, so at this point, we're over, so remember GDP is production. So we are over in that case. So it's an increase. All right. So income expenditure equilibrium, GDP equals C plus I, C plus I planned plus I unplanned, AE planned plus I unplanned. So whenever real GDP exceeds AE planned, I unplanned is positive. When real GDP is less than AE planned, excuse me, the unplanned investment is negative. So firms always act to correct mistakes. Um, they don't change their prices, but they can adjust their output. And that's what I was telling you about unemployment and income. So we just gonna fire people. Um, so those responses eventually eliminate the unanticipated changes in inventories, move the economy to a point at which real GDP is equal to planned aggregate spending. So when the economy is in income expenditure equilibrium, when aggregate output or real GDP is equal to planned aggregate spending, so income expenditure equilibrium of GDP, which is basically income, is the level of real GDP in which real GDP equals planned aggregate spending. You probably realize that when I'm probably like preaching to a choir at this point. Um, so your equilibrium point, um, your planned AE is right there. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have a 45-degree line crossing. So what I've got, let's talk about how this really works, right? If you look at my vertical axis, I got planned AE spending. If you look at my horizontal axis, I got real GDP. If I draw a 45-degree line between those two, or from those two, technically every point on that 45-degree line is an equal distance between those two lines, right? Between those two axes. And that's why it says on that little thing that's touching that 45-degree line, AE planned equals GDP. That's the whole point of the 45-degree line. Okay? So this is what this whole thing relies on. And as you can see, when the 45-degree line crosses my AE line, it looks like a cross, right? It looks like an X, looks like a cross, whatever you want to call that. That's why this model or this thing, as it says right here at the bottom of this wording here on the right, is known as the Keynesian cross. This is all, John Maynard Keynes and his stuff. So that's what this model is known as. Okay? And so at that level of 2,500 real GDP, I have unplanned investment of 200 because that's that gap. Okay? And here at 1,000, I have unplanned of 400, negative 400. So I'm negative 400. I was over 200, positive 200 at 2,500. I'm negative 400 there. And so GDP needs to go up. So at the 200, GDP needs to fall. At the 2,000, we're even. All right. If output's greater than expenditures, what do we do? So that means that GDP is greater than AE. And if GDP is greater than AE, then people need to get laid off. Just saying. Output's greater than expenditures. You need to lay some people off, cut income, move back. Okay? You got to move back toward zero. All right, multiplier process. Actually, we're going to pause right here and we're going to move on to the next video. We'll get to the multiplier process and what should be our final.